Middlekauff! Hey, hey! Well. We did not expect to be here, but here we are, John. We were taking the week off.
Weeks.
With an S. Weeks. But we came out of semi-retirement today.
Something happened?
USC and UCLA say they're going to the Big Ten, or people say they're going to the Big Ten. By the time you listen to this, maybe they're already gone. Kevin Durant has requested a trade. And I don't know. XL Sports is suing Freddie Freeman. I don't think that news quite reaches the other two, but...
Well, Gottlieb broke the story. You see that?
I did see it. But then I read a Ken Rosenthal that I didn't think he put Gottlieb's name in it. He didn't give Gottlieb the credit. He was just writing...
That it was true?
That Freddie found out something about the contract when he was in Atlanta, and it devastated him. That it never should have been this way. But he also wrote... Not that we came on live today and broke the siesta to talk about the Atlanta Braves. He also wrote that Alex Anthopoulos, the GM of the Braves, this is kind of what he wanted, was maybe to move on from Freddie and go younger with Matt Olson. And he didn't really want to pay Freddie, and that's why it happened the way it happened too. But
Gottlieb named the agent, whose last name is like Casey Close or something like that.
Yeah, that's his name. Yep.
That guy told SI, I saw a quote today, like, I will go under oath. It's like, shut up, you fucking loser. Well, Freddie's in tears. I was watching Sunday Night Baseball. He's like crying at the plate.
I know. Gottlieb just texted me, Excel threatening to sue! Exclamation point. I'm like, I don't think it's the biggest story of the day, Doug. But it's his story, John.
It was his story.
So what brought us out of our siesta, out of our bye week? First it was USC UCLA, and then it was Kevin Durant has requested a trade. This is Kevin
40
Durant.
days. I'm like Kyle Shanahan, like 40 days away.
40 days. I know. Lent, giving up podcasting for Lent. But this USC UCLA thing today. Actually, you had a word. I want to start with what that word you had in mind today. Let's start with that.
Well, when I saw the story break, I was like, oh my God, because I didn't want I just like a little break. I don't like the craziness because I get exhausted from the fluff. And this isn't fluff. I mean, this is a major, major story. Just like Kevin Durant requesting a trade, which is, I mean, he's potentially the top 10 player of all time. He's going to be on like 7 teams in 7 years. It's exhausting, guy. Like, I don't want to see Kevin Durant fucking play for the Suns. I don't want to see UCLA and USC go to the Big Ten. But I'm also, and part of the reason why I need a little break is because what we do this for money. And I've become numb to a lot of the stuff because it's all revolve around money. Why do I love talking about Deebo Samuel and Kyle Shanahan when the football season starts? Because a lot of people care, and we make a lot of money doing that. And listen, so I would be hypocritical to talk about anything else. It's all about money. I was at the gym this morning. I flip on Live Golf. And it's like... They abbreviate the names, on the left side, F1 side. I can't even, who's that? What, PMI? It's like, is that Phil? You can't even tell what's going on. I'm just exhausted. Do you know what I enjoy? Sunday Night Football, Mahomes, Josh Allen. Sunday Night Baseball, fucking Aaron Judge at the plate. It's just very easy to consume. It's just exhausting, guy. This whole thing is just exhausting. But I'm emotional because I'm exhausted. I completely understand why all this is happening as someone whose grandpa taught at Cal forever. I grew up going to Cal games. I've watched the Pac-12 my whole life. It's sad. I think Justin Thomas said it best a couple weeks ago about Live Golf, and I think it encompasses here. This sucks because I think it's probably going to happen. I don't think they just threw this out there as a negotiating tactic. Right?
Yeah. I do think one of the differences between this and Live Golf is one day maybe everyone will care about Live Golf, right? Whether or not people are consuming content 4th of July weekend, we see the numbers. Less people consume it right now than normally consume it. Saturdays are going to roll around in college football season, and you and I both love college football. And whether or not people care today, right now, to consume podcasts today, right now on UCLA, USC, I know that when Saturday rolls around in 65 days and Lincoln Riley's making his debut and Oregon is playing Georgia in Atlanta and Utah is playing Florida, I know that's a great day. I know people care about that, right? Like that to me is the difference between those two things. They don't necessarily care on June 30th all the time as much. But we'll see. We'll see if people with big.
But it's not
breaking
even
news come out of
happening though, Guy. That's the thing. Like ultimately, Oklahoma and Texas are still like it takes a while for it to happen. So you find out about this. Like I'll say one thing for Live Golf. Like Live Golf is going on. Oklahoma and Texas, SEC, they're not fucking going till 2025. So it's like ultimately this year will turn on and Texas will be playing Kansas State. Oklahoma will be playing Iowa State. So it's like that to me is where it's exhausting. We're talking. I like things when I'm a free agent. I sign with this team. I leave.
I understand. I get it. I know the story is exhausting and it's not the action. But the fact is, USC's been in some version of the Pacific Coast Conference since like 1918 or something, right?
Of course, they're on the Pacific Ocean. Why would they not?
Exactly. And I think all of this stuff, whether it's free agency, Live Golf, college realignment, when the money makes all the decisions, and I understand why it does, right? If you're USC, you're like, wait a second, I can go to the Big Ten and potentially make, I don't know, we'll see what the Big Ten's next television contract is, but let's say it's $70 million a year from television revenue. And I'm supposed to just say no to that because of tradition? Because
what do they make now?
You know,
put that into context. Like 70, like
is that I mean, I don't think anyone makes 70 now. I think the SEC distributed last year about 55 million per school, but their new television deal is much larger. I think it's over $1 billion. Or excuse me, it's over $3 billion. But I think people think this Big Ten deal, even before SC, could be historically large. So let's say it's 20 million you're getting now. I don't know exactly what the COVID year kind of fucked up all the distributions, especially for the Pac-12. Their distribution was like under 20 million. Part of it was they only played a handful of football games. But generally speaking, it's still
they were the lowest of the Power Five, though, right?
Yeah, they were the lowest of the Power Five coming out of COVID. Generally speaking, they're going to be behind the SEC and the Big Ten, ahead of the ACC and the Big 12. That's where they've.
So they have not been last. They've not been last. The other two conferences.
And the fact that they were about to do a new TV deal, if everything stayed the same, they were going to be third in their television contract. It was going to be SEC, Big Ten, and then Pac-12, I think.
But the argument was the two top ones were so far ahead and going to continue to go forward. They were going to lap the other three, correct?
Correct.
Which is a problem.
So my point is, I hate Saturdays are different than Sundays. Like college football is different than the NFL. And this makes college football closer to the NFL, which, you know, every business would aspire to be like the NFL. So I don't blame SC necessarily for doing it. I'm not saying that. And on one hand, Oregon is pissed at USC until they get the call from the Big Ten, and then maybe they go, or until maybe the Pac-12 gives them some outsized piece of the pie. There have been a few examples because usually once it's rumored, it's happening. I forgot about this. I was talking to a buddy of mine who said Virginia Tech tried to leave Virginia behind, and the governor of Virginia said no. Like, you have to stay together. You have to take Virginia wherever you go, and that's why they're together now. In 2010, I think it was 2010, I went and found the tweet today. One of the guys from Orange Bloods tweeted Texas is going to the Pac-10, and then it didn't happen, right? Texas and Oklahoma are going to go to the Pac-10. And then you remember this probably. There was a day when Boise State was in the Big East, and then the Mountain West said, fine, we'll give you a bigger cut of the TV pie if you stay, and they stayed. For the most part, though, most of these things are not negotiated as leverage so much as they just come out once it's already done. And we've been talking about super leagues. I've been doing radio shows since I was in college. In 2007, I was doing radio shows talking about super leagues. Like, this is not a new idea, but I think that, as much as you can understand making these business decisions for money, because what other types of business decisions are there outside of financial ones? I also think part of where the money comes from with college football is the tradition. You know, I understand looking at it and going, if you're talking about tradition, then you're not talking about reality because you're not talking about money and you're just stuck in the past. But part of the reason college football makes the money it makes and gets the eyeballs it gets are the traditions involved in all the college sports, right? All the unique rivalries. USC playing at Maryland, ain't exactly that. Now, it may not matter because the television revenues are going to be so big that they're going to play in the championship games.
But the Big Ten's not losing any of their rivalries. They're keeping all their schools, just like the SEC's not losing their rivalries. They're just adding the two.
Well,
they're
but
adding Texas,
rivalries,
Oklahoma, and
those,
USC and UCLA.
Yeah, those leagues. But rivalries have been broken before. Texas and Texas A&M. Now they're going to come back together. But the rivalries that exist, all of the big games that exist, there is a tradition that makes them worth watching for. And when you eliminate leagues that are 12, 10 teams, you eliminate weekly games between teams. For the most part, every week, even if you've got a bad team, you've got a game with some history to it, right? Like the Apple Cup, Washington and Washington State. It's a great rivalry. It's one of the oldest rivalries in all college football. Washington and Washington State are not equals financially. Like if the Big Ten wants to continue, their next calls would be to Oregon and Washington. That's who the Big Ten would add, right?
Yeah.
They wouldn't call Washington State also. And yet that game is every Friday or Saturday on Fox because it's a great rivalry, Washington State. That is a game that the tradition creates the money in that matchup. The tradition creates the money. And, you're creating a big league means you don't play all of those. Everybody doesn't play everybody every year. I don't think college football for the fan is better off with super leagues, but I mean, clearly that's where we're headed because ideally your teams play the same teams every year. And that's how you build up rivalries. Playing somebody every 5 years does not create a tradition.
But here's the thing, like the SEC and the Big Ten, and I know you're talking about the Pac-12, but they don't give a shit about that. If you and I run a business and we're crushing it, we will steal from other businesses 100%. And not worry about their issues. Okay. And ultimately, USC and UCLA, just like Texas and Oklahoma, are probably looking at each other and going, why are we going to stay here if we can bounce to a much more lucrative area? It's why I've defended the live guys. It's why I defend any human being that takes a job for more money. That doesn't always mean it's going to be the right. If your decision is strictly based off cash, doesn't mean it's going to make you happy. It's always going to work, but it's understandable. And I think two things make the world go round: money and sex. You need sex to keep procreating in humans, and you need money to keep paying everyone to operate. What? Procreation down right now. I know. So which down as Elon says is a problem.
Have more.
I listen. I mean, it's absolutely devastating to do a conference that I enjoy. Obviously, you call the games there, but I also think we're years away. It's not like my free agency example. Like when Christian Kirk signed with the Jacksonville Jags, he was with the Jacksonville Jags immediately. This is just one of those things that I'm not saying it's not going to happen. Clearly feels like it's going to, but it's going to, like, everything remains the same for a while.
Yeah. I am with you on your word on it, exhausting. I get it. And I'm not saying,
I think the story would be 10x bigger if you told me that, like, they were going to be there next, like, this fall.
For sure.
Like, holy shit.
For sure. But I still think
2027.
Yeah. Well, 24, but I still think
was that the date?
24 at the earliest, which makes sense because that's when the Pac-12's television contract is up, and that's when I think the Big Ten's new TV deal would be. And I think 24 is the first year of the new SEC deal with Texas and Oklahoma. I think that's the year they're gone. Right, they have 2 more years. Yeah. So Fox.
I thought I read 25, but could be wrong.
I gotta double check that, but I would imagine those things will pretty much line up. I'm not. Again, my argument is not I wouldn't do this if I were the Big Ten. It's the same thing I would try to do, just like it's the same thing the Pac-10 tried to do. But I also think that the traditions that get lost are not just people mopey around looking in their rearview mirror. I think that losing those traditions is sad for the fans. And I don't know if you can expand forever and not lose a little something. I think college football loses a little something. Doesn't mean it's not still big business. Doesn't mean it's not still going to work. Doesn't mean people aren't going to watch the games or go to the games. Doesn't mean Saturdays now suck. I'm not saying that, but I do think something gets lost along the way that you just don't get back in super leagues.
I guess part of it is, with age and maturity. Maybe I'm numb to it all. Like I remember when we were doing the radio show about the Raiders, like how shitty it was going to be, and then they left, and Vegas seems to be cool, and it's gone pretty seamlessly. Things just change, and I think historically things are always changing. People leaving leagues, 100%. Divisions mix up, and you just become. At the time, it's really big, and then you ultimately become desensitized to it. Now, sometimes, like in college sports specifically, when we were kids, Nebraska and Colorado were big-time powers in football, and now they feel pretty irrelevant in both. Or both programs feel irrelevant in
I just think even though the Super League means big, college football gets smaller and people will get left out in all of this, right? The like Washington State is in a really bad spot right now. Oregon State, our guy Jonathan Smith, they're at risk right now because the Big Ten Super Leagues means more than even what exists now. Like I think
But
Utah,
isn't Kansas and
Colorado,
Oklahoma State and all the Big 12 schools are too?
Yeah, I mean now Kansas is elite at basketball, so they might, somebody might keep them around somehow, some way. Maybe the Big Ten. I don't know.
Didn't they just win the national championship?
They just won the national championship. So I was saying, I've been watching Mad Men, which is good show. And season 6, I would refer you to season 6 of Mad Men.
You're doing a lot of TV watching.
Where Don Draper wants to get Chevrolet, but he's competing with bigger agencies to get Chevrolet. So him and another agency agree to combine their pitch to make themselves a bigger agency. They merge. And, you think about all the options right now. If you're George Kliavkoff, the commissioner of the Pac-12, that you're trying to figure out, like, what do we do? If UCLA and USC are really gone, how do we keep Oregon and Washington? How do we keep this league together? Are Utah and Colorado, are the Arizona schools next? Because I'd be calling if I'm them. This always happens, right? Somebody leaves and there's a domino effect of everyone just trying to find a way to survive. So would the Big 12 and the Pac-12 somehow merge their best teams to create, like, hey, let's be the third Super League. Let's not let all of our teams get poached and let's try and keep it together. But the reality is the leagues don't really get to decide. It's the teams that decide, right? It's the presidents and the ADs that make these deals. So you've got to find a way to convince those schools, don't go to that other thing. We'll have something good for you here. And that's really hard when everyone's losing their head. Like if you're Oregon right now, you're just trying to figure out how do we get on the boat to make sure we don't get left behind.
Luckily, they got a powerful enough brand that they would find a
100%,
boat.
and they will find a boat. But Washington State and Oregon State might not, right?
Yeah, they'd be fucked. I mean, but honestly, they would just, the Mountain West would become way sweeter. They would play Boise State, they would play Fresno State, and honestly, you could argue that's maybe what they're destined to do. I mean,
in
the day and age where money, in the world we live in, more than ever, because the money is so enormous, even relative to the times, and we factor in inflation, it's huge. That like I would imagine just USC just looking at the books like, what are we doing? Like, why are we subsidizing, let alone our own athletic department, but all the other programs? And so you justify it, I would imagine, that way. And that's what Texas and Oklahoma did, which you would say Texas and Oklahoma as a combination. Texas did it twice?
Well, because Texas got first, they got the Longhorn. They got like a sweetheart deal in the Big 12, right? So twice they've been like, hey, we're worth more than the rest of you.
But if you had a draft, wouldn't you say that UCLA, USC, and Texas and Oklahoma would go above USC and UCLA in the college sport landscape, football, basketball?
Yeah. I mean, USC might go ahead of Oklahoma. Texas would go 1. Right. Obviously Oklahoma's had much more success than USC has had.
Yeah, the timing of USC, like in the Pete Carroll era, yeah, they would go high. I would say the last decade, it wouldn't be a no-brainer. Oklahoma would go above them, and they're better at all the other sports. So it's like
just on market, it's money, is television market, is revenue, is USC and LA is pretty valuable.
But I'd say Oklahoma's pretty valuable commodity. That's why the SEC wanted them. I mean, they produce. Like they're
not valuable because of a TV market. They're valuable because they're a national brand.
You put them on television to play football. People watch Texas and Oklahoma. Yeah. But my point is that like their value together, just those two programs, were more valuable than the rest of the entire conference combined, and that includes Kansas basketball, which is easily the most prominent thing that they have. It's probably a little different out west because Oregon is a really valuable property. But like ultimately Washington being a powerful school and a lot of history, like, is it really that valuable of a property?
I mean, if you're, but take your point and draw it out even further. Like if you're going to have a draft, you would say, well, Illinois gets to be in, but Oregon's trying to find a home, right?
But Illinois is already in.
Well, that's my point, though. That's what I'm saying.
They're in the club.
Yeah, I get it. But if we're going to go by logic, who really belongs in the big boy table? Who belongs, Illinois or Oregon?
But that, to me, that's a different conversation. Part of it is like, does Dan Snyder and Mark Davis belong? No, but they're in the club and you can't kick them out.
Oh,
Part of they're in the club and they're in the country club that everyone wants to join, totally. And they're part of like, you want to join us
in the world where you're like, well, Washington State and Oregon State, maybe they belong a level down. Well, maybe Rutgers does too.
True, right? but they got in that country club and they got their membership.
I get it. But to say that like Washington State, tough shit, that's just the way it is. I understand that is just the way it is. But it's not logic because Rutgers doesn't deserve to be there any more than Washington State.
Yeah, but the Big Ten, we're not blowing up the Big Ten. We're just adding 2 people. So like
what I'm saying is why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they ultimately blow it up and go, if we're going to be 20 teams, let's be the most powerful 20 we can be?
Because they like the Chicago market. And Illinois represents that.
No. What about Rutgers, New Jersey? Yeah.
You could question. Yeah, I think if they would maybe like a redo on Rutgers and Maryland, but they're in.
We'd swap out Rutgers and Maryland for Washington and Oregon in a heartbeat.
But I don't know. But that's not possible, probably.
No, they're not doing that. No. But that to me is the scenario where if you're the Pac-12 and you're the Big 12, you go, instead of us fighting over Texas, like us trying to poach Texas Tech and you guys trying to take Arizona and we try to convince Houston to come here and you guys try to tell Utah or Colorado you belong with us, why don't we both trim the fat and take our 8 best from each and make our own 16-team league?
Because the Big 10 guy is making all the money and they don't give a shit.
Big 12, Pac-12 and Big 12.
Oh.
I'm saying Texas, Oklahoma were out. So the Big 12 added BYU, Houston, Cincinnati, and
yeah.
Whoever the fourth was. And UCF.
Yeah.
UCF, Houston, BYU, Cincinnati. And so now if you're the Big 12, don't you call Arizona and Arizona State? Don't you call Colorado and Utah? It's like, guys, your league's falling. Big Ten's not calling you. You got to come to us. Because next thing, right? So what I'm saying is if you're the Pac-12, do you call the Big 12? You go, look, we're not going to try and take Texas Tech. You don't try and take Arizona. Let's just take who are your best 8. Let's get our best 8, and it'll suck for the ones that are left out.
I think the number one thing you have to do, though, is it's like when rumors were Bryson and Koepka and DJ were going to go, the PGA Tour had to fight to keep those guys. Now, ultimately, they lost.
Yeah.
You have to fight to keep UCLA and USC.
That's why. You got to do that first, if that deal's not done. But fight means, hey, guys, you're going to get more money than everybody else in the next TV deal. And the problem is the Big Ten's TV deal is all but done. And Fox is involved in this. Like they're going to be able to say to them, here's how much money you're going to get. The Pac-12 is a year away from having its television deal really negotiated. So what can they really say to USC right now? We're going to give you a USC football TV network? Well, Texas already tried that. No, thanks. We have YouTube channels now. So we don't need a USC football network, right? I just don't see how the Pac-12 can make the case to USC. Here's why you shouldn't go. Because the timing is bad. The Big Ten deal is going to get signed in the next month.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue, well, that's part of business. They were there to be had. They were there to be a mark.
I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying I don't know how. I don't think it looks good for the Pac-12 because I don't think they can put a real number in front of USC right now, whereas the Big Ten can.
I agree. I mean, I've just come to grips with I think it's over, which is sucks and everything. But it's like
what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I also do. And again, I didn't go to these schools, but I do not feel bad for Washington State, Oregon State, Arizona State. Like it's just part of the deal in any business, in any walk of life is like, you have to be viable. And some of these programs on the highest level of a conference, right? It's kind of like an individual athletic program. Really in the SEC, Alabama, Georgia, Florida carry the majority of the conference for all the cash, right? Historically. I mean, now it's becoming, they're all kind of making money. Just no different in the athletic department. Football and basketball pay for everything. Well, ultimately, USC football, Oregon football, now Oregon football might get screwed in this too, Arizona basketball, UCLA basketball, like 7 total programs pay for basically everything. Doesn't mean I don't respect Jonathan Smith, high-level guy, came on the show, but ultimately that program, what they bring to the table, historically, especially in the last 20 years of the explosion of money, is kind of irrelevant. Like we could replace them with, if Oregon State had been replaced with Fresno State and Arizona State had been replaced with San Diego State over the last 20 years in the Pac-12, there would be absolutely no difference. And that's, I think, the big boys' always argument is like, this gets back to the golf thing. Phil, Tiger, Rory, like, we are carrying you. USC football, even though they've sucked, their logic is like, well, we're going to be good again. And when we are good, we're going to fucking carry everybody. Because Oregon, you have been the carrier, and really your brand couldn't be any bigger, and your ceiling is only so high. It's just a fact. And I know Schwartz and those guys will get mad, but ultimately, like, USC football blows Oregon out of the water. It just does.
In theory.
Well, from a television rating standpoint.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And that's what pays the money. And again, I love Oregon football. I like watching these programs, but you and I were part of these negotiations on an Excel spreadsheet. That's not best for the fans, not best for the consumer.
And that's my point. It's not about feeling bad for the schools. College football, and this boat had sailed.
But this just happened to the Big 12, right? I think we just saw this. The school like K-State just got royally fucked. And I think Oklahoma and Texas will be like, whatever.
Yeah, well, 100%. But you are reducing in some ways the footprint. You got all these college football was like podcast networks for a long time. Right? On a podcast network, and there's a lot of them.
Which is stupid because you still have to go to the specific podcast, right? It's not like a radio station where just all the podcasts. Well,
it's not stupid, as you know, and I know, it's not stupid from a ad sales standpoint.
No.
Right.
I don't mean it's stupid. I just mean like it sounds like it's like a radio station, even though it's not.
They're not all on the same channel, right?
No. Yeah. They all have their own channels.
But from an ad sales standpoint, you can create little pockets of
new media.
I know a guy, one of the guys who gave me my first TV show when I was in college, made a lot of money owning small TV stations, but he owned a lot of them. Small TV stations in Fresno, small TV stations in like the California coast, small TV stations in Southern California, small TV stations in Montana. And you put all of this together and you've got pockets, Kansas State and Washington State and Oregon State and San Diego State and Fresno State and Boise State and Maryland and Illinois. And Illinois is not a good example because of Chicago, but and the next thing you know, you've got like all these little footprints that add up to a big footprint. And that's where I feel bad for fans. We saw college sports work when Kansas State and Washington State and Oregon State and like they got to be a part of it. And the club is getting smaller. And the television numbers are going to be up from a dollar standpoint. But for fan bases, I think part of what made college football attractive is that it didn't always make the most sense. It was quirky. The NFL makes sense, right? It is a business. It makes sense. College football has always been a little bit different. And it's part of what made it unique and fun is that, like I said before, I'll use the Apple Cup. Washington State and Washington could play. They're in very different markets. They're in very different financial situations. Washington has way more money. And yet they would play each other every single year. And the game really mattered to a lot of people. And that was what was unique about college football. And every time a few teams get cut out, you lose a little bit of that.
Well, I agree, but I think one thing that's truly happening, and they're always going to deny this because they did, ESPN did with Texas, Oklahoma. The networks go, listen, if we're going to give you these enormous amounts of money, whatever it is, you said $3 billion for the SEC, the Big Ten is going to be just stupid because of the power of just Ohio State alone. Yeah, of just Ohio State alone. It's been very, very lucrative for Fox to be in business with the Big Ten. Well, why don't you?
And the Big 12 was lucrative for them too, but then they lost Texas and Oklahoma.
Well, exactly, and then they pivot.
They got this back, yeah.
So you can't convince me that the television executives, which do not give a shit about any of this, they just care about the ratings and the money. And in fairness, if we're going to invest our companies this much money, we want it to be worth our time. And to me, they're going to deny this to the high heavens because they did Texas, Oklahoma. ESPN did. Remember when I think it was Bob Bowlesby. Is he the commissioner of the Big 12?
Yeah, they just actually announced a new guy yesterday.
Didn't Bowlesby call ESPN like they were behind? They screwed everybody.
Torturous interference, is that the legal term or something?
Well, that's going to happen here. I would guess that people are going to point the finger at Fox or whoever's involved in the negotiations for doing this. Of course they are. It's the business they're in because they don't care, and you could argue that we'll only find out over time if this diminishes. But I'd argue like when Oregon State and Colorado play right now, does it mean that much to a lot of people? Now, I didn't go to school there. Just like, I probably pay attention to more Fresno State games than the average guy. So it all depends. We all have an agenda or a bias on college sports. Where in the NFL, and I would say pro sports in general, like it's easier for us to consume like a random playoff game than it is. I think college sports is a little more specific, a little regionally. Yeah. And that's where the LA market is just so huge. I mean, they have 20 million people there.
But as you know, USC is more valuable as a national brand than they are because all the people in LA watch USC, right? LA is valuable from a recruiting standpoint too, but they're just a national brand. They're just, like you said about Oklahoma, they've just reached a point where they're just a national brand.
USC football and UCLA basketball are national brands.
Yeah, national brand. And I think you're right. I mean, Fox, and there's no question that was a part of all of this. Because ultimately it's about getting your league set before you do your TV deal so you can get as much TV money as possible. And Fox says, look, okay, you get this done, we'll give you more TV dollars.
Well, it's why the NFL pushed so hard to get the CBA done before they finalized their deal with the networks. Remember, they pushed. The players all have been signed off. Then they signed the TV deal, and then all the players were like, this is bullshit, we're getting screwed. It's like, no, the owners wanted it specifically. It does not matter if you attend games anymore. It just doesn't. All the money is your time on your couch. That's what matters most to college sports, to pro sports. It's like Baggerly wrote that article about diminishing attendance and stuff. In baseball, they still, even now, the gate matters to baseball, but the television deals for most of these teams, baseball, basketball, obviously football, matter way more than any gate receipt. Owners want people to come to the gate. But if you don't, if the television deals are as big as they are, they're still making a profit. They cannot lose. It's impossible to be in the red. You make more money, right, if you're Jed and you sell out. But even if 30,000 people showed up instead of 75, or if USC goes to the Big Ten and they start getting $80 million a year, let's just pick a number, and the Coliseum is half full because it turns out Lincoln fucking goes to the Rams and their team sucks, they would still be profitable. Right?
Yeah, ahead of time how much money you're getting for the next 8 years.
Well, it's set. It's fixed. Years. It's a fixed rate.
Yeah.
People are like, how do you guys make money on podcasts? Well, we got a couple different avenues. Some of them are fixed rate ad reads. We know exactly how much money's coming. That's what any business wants, right? That's why insurance companies or phone companies or cable companies, they're in great businesses. Every month they know that Haberman, Middlekauff, we're paying $200 for TV, $50 for phone, and whatever our insurance is, guaranteed cash.
Whether I turn on the TV or not, whether I use the internet or not.
You could go to Israel for 2 months, not touch Comcast one time, and you would still pay them a total of $400, right?
Well, you remember the world where you used to pay.
So why wouldn't you want the most money possible in these fixed rates when you can't?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
I'm not even necessarily trying to defend it. I just think it's very understandable.
Again, if I were in the shoe of USC and they call me, I cannot say, no, man, I don't want to do that. It's not what's right. Well, here's the deal. You're going to
rumors are USC did call them.
Started it. Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? If I'm UCLA, then I don't know, man. We're a UC system playing Cal every year. Really important to the UC system. It's a big deal. And they're like, yeah, but you're going to make $70 million a year. Well, as I have a responsibility, I'm running a business here to say yes to that offer. So I get why I do not get
fiduciary duty guy.
Fiduciary. We're a fiduciary. Who's the one that's always a fiduciary? Fisher Investments. Are they the one that's always running? The word fiduciary is just great.
Well, that's why Twitter sold to Elon. They had no choice.
Because they have an obligation to make the most money they can.
But this is where I get back to, if you're telling me USC called, you can't convince me otherwise that television executives weren't part of USC's idea.
Well, no one's trying to give it. They were 100%. There's a reason all the Fox guys were tweeting on Thursday morning.
Yeah.
Liner, eyeball emoji, Brady, Cowherd.
Cowherd's in Turks and Caicos.
I saw him going live from a TSA line or something. So they absolutely were involved, and you'd want them involved. They have to be involved. They're the ones that tell you, here's how much this is worth. So, yeah, it comes down to television, but something, I love when the West Coast these were the West Coast teams, but whatever. When I say that, I don't mean I wouldn't have done the same thing. I'm not living in the past by making that comment, other than it's changed. And it's been changing. I mean, a lot's changed. The last year of college athletics is, NIL has created a lot of change. And you start going, well, if the athletes are going to get paid, maybe I'm getting less revenue from my advertisers because they're sending that money to the athletes. I also think you have to prepare for a world. What if one day I have to pay them? right? Ideally in college athletics right now, NIL is the best possible scenario because with NIL, you don't take money out of your pocket to pay the player. But what if that happens? What if that 5 years from now, that is where this goes? Well, now you're really at a disadvantage if you're basically operating under a much lower salary cap than everybody else. Feel like
it would cripple the haves and the have-nots, right? It would separate it.
and already there's a
10x.
separation. But if it comes to that, you'd be like, we had the chance to go to that league 5 years ago and we didn't do it. And now we're all paying players and we can't pay players as much. We're done. So that's the other thing that I think you'd have to be thinking is like, if the world changes again, just think how much it's changed in the last year, in the last 3 years. If the world changes again, how do we keep up if we say no to this? I don't blame them. I
also think it's pretty clear now. Was Oklahoma and Texas 12 months ago or was it 2 years ago? I can't remember.
Oh, it was last year.
So I think, we went from being emotional about it, and obviously these are emotional times, to like, again, you get desensitized. Like I'm just thinking about it, like I'm kind of like all this stuff. You told me that, like,
though I think most people, it's an emotional thing.
No, yeah, I mean, I had the same, like, holy cannoli when I first saw that. But like these things keep happening, like time and time and time again. Like it's clear where the world of sports is going. It's inevitable for all this stuff to continue happening because it's all around one thing and one thing only, and that's money. It's not like they're just doing this to try to be the smartest guy in the. It's very black and white. The whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, part of what's kept college sports,
I guess it's easier after my emotion kind of. It's just like kind of to come to grips with absolutely everything.
Well, it's happened many times before, right?
But I remember when I was at Fresno State seeing pictures on the wall of like when they were in the WAC and all these different conferences. It's happened forever.
Pacific, who no longer has a football team.
Well, wasn't the Pac-10 once the Pac-8 and then became the Pac-12?
Yep.
So it's so they've done it.
Yeah, they tried to get Texas and Oklahoma. There's no victims necessarily. Well, I shouldn't say that.
That probably would have saved the conference and made it
maybe
a much more,
because they would have got the TV deal they wanted then if they had Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah. Was Larry behind that?
Yes. Almost pulled it off.
But did
not. But it was getting reported like this is happening. And maybe they got played by Texas, right? Maybe Texas just used it as a way to get the deal they wanted. Maybe I would love to know from the people involved at Texas at that time, were they really ever going, or were they just leveraging? That might have been all that it was. So what does Super League mean? I think,
but at the time when that happened a long time ago, I would say the SEC wasn't quite what the SEC became. And like, was it just, or they just realized how valuable they were and they were kind of pimping themselves out, and they probably thought about it because it's not like they were, I guess maybe the Longhorn Network came after that.
Yeah. That's how they leveraged. They got a bigger piece of the TV pie from the Big 12.
So you're right.
And they got maybe their own network, but that wouldn't work now, right? Now we'd be like your own network, whatever. Just, the world, that was 12 years ago. It's like, it's a whole other world now. But as the pie gets bigger, people don't look for more people to share it with. So super conferences means we're adding, but the number of slices gets smaller. So the Big 10 gets bigger, the SEC gets bigger, but ultimately what they're trying to do is make the total number of slices smaller. Meaning, if you're the SEC, I think you try to add Clemson and Miami. If you're Clemson, Miami, at least you try to go to the SEC, right? And you go, when people say Power 2, I don't think they mean as it's constructed right now. I think you still try to pick off a few more, right? If
so it basically just becomes the NFC versus the AFC equivalent of.
Yeah, like ultimately, do you get USC, UCLA, Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado is the Big 10 West? Or, some like that is what it turns into.
And you take Miami, Florida State, Clemson, and maybe, NC State or North Carolina.
I don't know. Who is the fourth, you think? North Carolina?
I'd say it's North Carolina. I would imagine it'd be North Carolina.
Yeah.
Are you factoring in basketball too? Then,
yeah, I mean, but so what I was going to say though too, John, is like part of the reason it stays.
Because wouldn't Arizona be in play or no?
Yeah, I think Arizona State would be in play. I think the schools in trouble in the Pac-12 would be Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody earlier. They're like, Cal and Stanford. I'm like, well, why though? Just because they're in California? I don't know. Now, one of the reasons college athletics has been the way it is because states are involved, right? States say like UCLA and Cal, you guys are together. Or Virginia and Virginia Tech, you guys are together. Wasn't there a Texas school? Was it TCU? Remember, was it TCU? Wouldn't it? Maybe not. They're a private school. Somebody got like attached to Texas once upon a time. Maybe I'm misremembering that.
I don't remember that.
But states make rules that apply to their schools, So I don't know if like the UC system would be like UCLA, you can't leave Cal behind, but I don't know how you stop them.
Yeah.
But
listen, Stanford was a top 5 team for like 5 straight years and drew like 10,000 people.
Yeah, and that is you're better off having a lot of fans than being good.
100%.
That's what USC has shown. That's what Texas has shown.
I mean, look at the SEC as a whole. Like Florida sucked for a while now. They thrive, right?
Yeah. They've had like 6 coaches since Kyle Whittingham took over at Utah.
Texas A&M, I don't think, has won more than like 9 games in like a decade. No one cares. I mean, the place packed. People watch. Texas is a good example too. Texas has been really terrible. I mean, really terrible. Difference is like USC. People don't watch USC when they suck. I mean, they have the West Coast thing. They got to be good.
Yeah, I think if you put USC up against Notre Dame, the rest of the country's like, oh, USC's on. But the West Coast is like, why? They suck.
Yeah.
So I think that, Super Leagues means whatever, 60 total teams playing at a new level of football, maybe less.
And I'm cool with that eventually because that's clearly where it's going to happen.
That's where it's been long predicted. You just got to kind of do the math and go, well, if you do a power 2, is that 2 20-team leagues and it's just 40 teams? Is that enough teams? Or do you go 3 leagues of 20 teams each, 60 teams? Which right now the Power 5 is about 60 teams, I think, right? Power 5 football is like 60 some teams because you had 12 plus 14 plus 10 plus 16 plus whatever the number, that all adds up, plus one more, plus another 12 teams,
Notre Dame,
whatever it was.
Oh, BYU,
Notre Dame,
the Independence.
I think it added up to like 60 something, right? Is what Power 5 football was. So is that like 3 20-team leagues? But do we even have like leagues means like the NFL has divisions? Is that what this becomes? They have individual TV contracts. That's what makes it different, right? So maybe they stay as leagues. But
I think part of it is like the Big Ten and the SEC brands are fucking powerful, and they print cash for these television networks and their schools. So like those aren't going away anytime soon.
No,
for all the
as
stuff.
long as they have a playoff that involves the major teams, that's all they need, right? They don't need to be under the same TV contracts.
The Big Ten and the SEC, to me, that those brands mean something. Obviously, financially. Ask the schools and ask the networks. And that's where the Big 10, the Big 12, the Pac-12, and the ACC has clearly fallen behind from the eyes of the television networks, which are now kind of running things. Which is just the way the world ends up working. It's not whatever our industries are. The most powerful thing we have is whoever's paying us. And for you and I, it's advertisers. Right. For some people listening, it's the consumer, that's the monthly recurring revenue, whoever it is, right? And in this,
if it's a radio station, it might be the rights holder. Like if you were a radio station, maybe the home of the Raiders, let's say, you would do things that they wanted you to do, right?
Yeah, and the problem is they don't actually generate you that much money. It's like, why are we valuing everything?
Fire the post-game host because he said something.
You one thing I've learned as I got older, and I was always taught, like, I'm gonna go work for myself. And like, well, you eventually always answer to somebody. And in a weird way, you do. Like the Ohio State couldn't, and like Alabama right now couldn't be any more powerful. Their brands, how successful they are, yet they do answer to, like, right now, Alabama, CBS, right? Just they get pushed around on different times throughout the season. When CBS wants them, they have to do what CBS is doing. In Ohio State, they play at 9 a.m. kickoffs a lot. Why? Right? Because who wants them there? Fox. Do you think ideally they always want to play at 12? Probably. There are some weeks where it's like, fuck, can we play at 4? Right? It's just human nature, but they don't have a choice. And I think that's where this thing's headed. And I think clearly Texas, Oklahoma, they probably feels like had a better idea. And Texas, like you said, created the network so they understand that world. And USC, basically the people that run Fox are USC and UCLA graduates. So it's like it's all in cahoots. It's all about the money. So while it is exhausting talking through this, I'm just completely numb to it all, and I expect more of this crap just to never stop. We've seen in golf, we're seeing in college football. I'm just glad the NFL is like basically it's impossible to take them down.
It's done.
In terms
like
of
what's going to happen? They add 2 teams, like whatever.
Yeah,
right.
Which is probably not even going to happen, right?
You got to find the markets that are worth. Yeah, exactly. I thought Van Pelt said it really good today. Somebody was like, ESPN is in bed with the league, and Van Pelt's like, everybody's in the same bed. This is an orgy. I was like, that's a good way of putting it, right? Your money, the money I make is the money you make, and the more money you make, the more money I get, and the more money I get, the more I can separate from everybody else. So,
yeah, I think Oregon right now has got to be a little nervous. To me, that would be the program.
I would think they'd be able to get an invite from the Big Ten. I wonder if the SEC would go, yeah, let's expand west. Let's add Oregon and Washington.
See, to me, the Oregon market means nothing to them. Like, to me, a part of your adding is like the cash cow and the market. Like, to get that's where LA would matter. Like, I think it would make sense for them because you want to recruit there. But like, what does Oregon bring to the table?
Yeah, I mean, I in a world where if
I was an SEC administrator, I wouldn't want them.
Yeah, but you one thing you do want to do is eliminate a league. You make more money if you can cut somebody else out, right? Do you take somebody on just to injure, just so the rest of it falls apart?
What I think makes sense is Oregon, Washington go to the Big Ten as well, so you get 14 teams. The SEC adds, whoever.
Miami, Clemson, and Florida State makes sense, even though it's only 3 of them. But add North Carolina to that.
Yeah, but they've already added 2, so the numbers would be a little off, right?
So they're at 16. They're at 6. SEC is at 16. Well, they're at 14 now, plus Oklahoma, Texas is 16. So they could get to 20 by adding 4.
And the Big 12 or the Big 10 are they at 10?
No, they're at 14, but they're going to be at 16 now.
So if you added Oregon, Washington, you'd be at 18. You'd
at
need
18.
2 more.
Yeah. But I mean, there's no rule that says you have to be at 20. But to me,
would it be worth adding Kansas just for the basketball program and maybe someone else?
Would you do I mean, Utah's not a massive market, but it's not a small market.
Utah, Kansas would make sense.
I think Colorado just has some fundamental big, like some Midwest ties. Like Colorado's a good market in terms of if you get the Denver market, even though
I would take if I had to draft, I would take Kansas for basketball alone 1, and I'd probably lean Utah just because they feel like they got a pretty solid football program. And Salt Lake City's a easy market to get in and out of, big market, growing market.
Yep,
kind of that region of like Colorado, Vegas, Salt Lake City, you kind of own that area, right? Like Ohio State, Utah.
Like they've established as a brand that if Utah is on television, I should watch that. Colorado is not at that point right now, right?
And even though their local markets, the last 20 years, their basketball program has been pretty good. Utah,
yeah, their basketball program has been good. Colorado's has too, but that's so secondary.
I feel like Colorado's a little like Nebraska. I know Nebraska's already in the club in the Big Ten. Is like,
yeah.
They just, when they made their move,
they're out of place right now.
Yeah, just
in some ways. In some ways, it's going to take. It feels like a miracle for it not to fall apart at this point. So, SEC and Big Ten are scared of Oregon. Go Ducks! $2. Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, and then I think if that happens, then I think the Big 12 takes the Mountain School. It definitely takes the Arizonas. If they're not, whoever's not included in the Big 10, if the Pac-12 can't keep them.
The problem is then the Big 12, like, I know they're better
like
than
a
the Mountain West,
plus.
but it's just, that's what you are. Like, do you just merge and stay on the West Coast for travel purposes?
I think you merge and don't take on too many, because if ultimately you like,
why wouldn't the Big 12 and the Mountain West just kind of do a merge type thing?
Well, I still think you'd be better off. Yeah, I mean, whatever, the Mountain West, and you'd still if you're the Big 12, you'd still rather have if you could get Stanford and Cal, you would take that.
Yeah, Stanford's in trouble. At least they got the academics. Same with Cal. Always have Jason Kidd and John Elway.
Kevin Durant has requested a trade, John. I saw Woj said 15 teams are interested in KD. 15 teams, half the league.
What a sad career.
So, I mean, it's unbelievable, isn't it? Just bizarre. I remember where I was 4th of July, 2016. I was getting ready to host the A's pregame show. This is another world. Speaking of things have changed.
Jesus.
On NBC Sports Bay Area. And they were like, hey, Kevin Durant just announced he's coming to the Warriors. We're going to go live. And it was, to me at the time, it was a really cool thing I got to do. I remember feeling that way because it was 4th of July, Kevin Durant, his letter in the Players Tribune comes out. And it was I just remember feeling like this is huge. This is one of the biggest days the sports will ever know. That's how it felt. But I was like, Kevin's going to be on 3 teams after he plays for the Warriors, minimum 2. He wants to play for Phoenix. I mean, it's just.
Well, he wants to play there because they're good. I mean, that's
the more you search for somebody else to fix your problems, I think the less credit you get when they get fixed. I don't know.
I do think he kind of represents the NBA, though. Of just guys always leaving and moving. Like again, the word numb comes up to me. 100%. It used to be more exhausting. Now I'm just like, I kind of laugh at it. Like it's not good for your league, man. I mean, it feels like Kevin Durant, when it's all said and done, is going to be on 6 teams and like the prime of his career. Oklahoma State Warriors, Nets. I can see Suns and one other team in the next 5 years. Like, what's the lock that wherever he gets traded to, he's going to like in 2 years? So it's just. The NBA has a mercenary problem, and that's what they feel. Just their guys are mercenaries. And again, I'm pro getting your money or whatever, but he's under. I saw someone's like, just everyone realizes he's under contract for 4 years, $195 million or something. It's not like he's going to be a free agent soon. Like he's got basically the rest of the prime of his career. It's just set.
I think it's just like the college football conversation. What's good for the participants isn't always what's best for the sport or what's best for the fans, right? Now, pro sports is different than college sports because the league is just the league. So wherever a player goes, wherever a team moves, whatever, they're all still in the same pie. But what's best for players is not best for fans. It's not best for the league. I mean, some of these numbers, like fans, Russell Westbrook's opting in for $47 million. On what planet does anybody think that's money well spent? Now, nobody wants to be accused, John, of pocket watching. Don't watch another man's money. But it's just.
But you don't in the NBA because the max contracts are the max contracts, right?
Right. What I mean, though, is like from a fan standpoint, teams being the same year after year after year is what's best for your sport. Rivalries build that way. Players being on 12 different teams, I think most people understand that Freddie Freeman is not the norm, that most players don't live and die with their franchise and want to be a Brave for life. That at the end of the day, it's nice, but most guys would not take less money to stay with a team. And I don't blame a guy that wouldn't take less money to stay with a team, right? If he had stayed with the Braves, he still would have got paid well, but he was going to take less money than the Dodgers or the Rays were offering. That was one thing Rosenthal wrote today. The Rays did offer more money than the Braves offered. But most guys are not Freddie. Most guys are not going to cry.
Did the agent want him in LA for some reason?
Maybe. I don't know. Most guys are not going to cry over that the way Freddie, right? Most guys don't care about their connection to a team as much as their fans do. Fans have been fans of teams for however many years they've been alive. Players have been a fan of that team for the most part, just for however many years they've been on the team. Well, if I'm 35 and my favorite player's been on my team for 6 years, I've got 29 years on him for how long I've loved that team. Or maybe subtract 8. Say I became a fan at 27 years, at 8 years old. So I've been a fan for 27 years of that team. He's been on the team for 6. In other words, I care way more about that team than that player does. And so we get that. I think most people get it. But part of sports and the connection of fans with a team is at least the illusion that players care about that team, that players play for this city, that when they win a championship, they grab the mic, they're like, Team Nation, We couldn't have done it without you. And the fans go, well, it's every parade in the history of parades has had that. And that illusion just completely implodes when players just play on a different team every
But it still does exist. Like, to me, Steph and Clay represent that.
It's
the Giants guys represent it.
But they are outliers now.
Yeah, I think Brady and the Pats represented it for a long time.
Totally. But those teams are now the exceptions, as opposed to, you know what? He's been fighting with this group for 7 years, and they finally broke through. I was thinking about it the other day. Could you imagine if the Sonics had never left Seattle? Would Kevin have ever wanted to leave? Like, he would have been in a major city, West Coast. He would have had like a corner to the country all to himself in a major market. Maybe him and Russ would have stayed in Seattle for 12 years. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
but I know.
I don't think Seattle feels as major.
Maybe it would have been a good place for him.
He was in Oklahoma City for 9 years.
Yeah, I know. And I think ultimately for sports, it was bad. And I felt this way when he joined the Warriors. It's bad for the NBA that Kevin Durant just left Oklahoma City. I'm not saying Kevin Durant should take one for the team for the sake of the league. But my ultimate point is what is good for the player isn't always what's good for the sport. And I think that's pretty clear. That's not a unique, but it's just the reality of it. That's where it's part of the secret of the NFL. The teams are in charge of the players. For the most part, right?
Yeah, it's healthy.
That's better for fans. It's not better for players.
But that's all that matters, because that's the health of the league. I mean, that's when the fans like, the NBA's lost a large percentage of fans over this player empowerment era. Like, that's not an opinion, that's a fact. And baseball, like, guys have never made more money on these enormous contracts. Like, it's clearly not going great. Now, there are different variables with the sports. Like, the NFL is still a league that while it's progressed, it's different than it was in like the 80s and 90s. It's still much closer to it always has been. GMs, owners, and coaches run it, not the players. And they fucking dominate. I mean, dominate. Absolutely dominate relative to the other sports in terms of our interest, in terms of television ratings, in terms of the way media covers it. Now, you could say the NBA, I think a lot of people argue that the NBA, the coverage outweighs the demand. Now, maybe it's covered like it thrives on the internet, but people don't actually watch the games. Like, I saw like 4.5 million people watch the draft, which was up. And again, I enjoy the first like 15 picks of it. I love a good draft, but like no teams do those numbers beside like close to the NBA and Western Conference Finals. So it's like the drama of the sport. That's where football has separated from, like, I was thinking about that fight that happened in baseball, and like all these guys got injured that were already injured. And I mean, it was crazy. Phil Nevin that got suspended 10 games was pointing. And I heard Steve Phillips describe it. I didn't see how it happened, but once he described it, the guy hit him and he missed, and then he brought him back in the second inning. Like, I was like, okay, this is pretty crazy. No one gives a shit. You couldn't listen to anywhere, any place beside Mad Dog Radio and hear anyone talking about it. No one cares. Yet if that happened in the NBA, also no one would have watched it, but everyone would be talking about it.
I think it would have been a bigger story.
It 100%. I'm saying like on podcasts and stuff, but no one would have actually watched the equivalent of Mariners Angels, that game.
More people would have shared the clip on social, like you said, though.
But in the NFL, it would have been the best of both worlds. If it was Thursday Night Football, Jags, Texans, and
everyone saw it live.
Everyone saw it live, then everyone would consume it, and then the rating, 15 million people would have been watching the game. Every single podcast, every single show, every television network would also talk about it. So it's like baseball has really none of it. Basketball just has the talk about it, but no one actually consumes the game. Football has everything. People have been like, well, then did a guy get hurt, and I was betting on the game, and everyone would have had to take.
Yeah. But almost, the NFL's gotten so big that being compared to the NFL is almost unfair.
Well, Kevin Durant requesting a trade is beside like if it wasn't for the Warriors winning the NBA championship, I don't think anyone would have cared about the NBA playoffs. But Kevin Durant ultimately is like, this is 2022 NBA. This story is enormous, even though ironically it happens all the time.
Yeah, but Kevin Durant's debut for the Phoenix Suns, people are going to go, whatever, right? To your point. This is your point, is that it's a big story when he wants a trade.
Or the Pelicans, or who knows? I mean, he could end up anywhere. Like, he's under contract for 4 years. They're going to trade him if he does get traded. Because in the NFL, what would happen? We ain't trading anybody.
See you in camp.
Yeah, see you in camp.
October 4th, we play the Knicks preseason. See you there.
Ask Debo how that went, right?
Ask him how it's going. Yeah. Last I checked, he was at the OTAs for $50K.
Like, do you think Kevin Durant 100% gets traded? They don't have to trade him.
Not 100%. No. Do you?
No, because I think that, like, usually when guys get traded, right, like Anthony Davis was never going to resign there. It usually happens because of re-signing him. Like, Kevin, where are you going to go? Like, why can't a team for the first fucking time be like, no? What? Remember when that used to happen in sports in our youth and the NBA thrived? It was like, no.
Because
can't you just say no? What are you going to do? Pout? Sit out? Like, I don't think you will, Kevin. I don't think you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it comes down to is when you have enough money, you can not show up to work because forfeiting your paycheck doesn't matter to you as much because you don't need the paycheck. Like if given
the Packers, A-Rod and the Packers, that's a good example. They're like, no, Aaron.
Yeah, A-Rod and the Packers would. But Devontae, they said, okay.
But he was never going to resign with them, and he told him that, right?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron had played harder years on his contract, right? But I think the difference is like
more in a weird way, even though he's a star, it's much easier to find another wide receiver than it is Kevin Durant or Aaron Rodgers.
It might actually make sense for the organization to do it, right?
Yeah, they were in some cap weird spots.
Yeah. But I think when you become rich enough to say, I don't care if you what is it? All those commercials. Oh, garnish. The IRS can garnish your paycheck. Call now. They can garnish your paycheck. But if you've made $300 million, it matters less to you. And they know that you don't necessarily need to show up for the paycheck. And so that's where a little bit of the players' leverage comes from. The Nets just went through the season with Kyrie, and they may say, we can't even just let us build like one of these other teams where the players cost less money, and maybe we could actually make a couple rounds of the playoffs with
talk about exhausted. Can you imagine being a Nets executive?
No, I mean it's crazy. You're not at, the boss isn't actually in charge, but there are other places like that, right? Howard Stern's boss isn't really that in charge of Howard Stern, right?
Yeah,
the highest paid employee at a place gets to come and go.
I think like is Howard still as big as he once was?
You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah,
there are like different rules for different people. Not everybody plays by the same.
Like Stephen A. ain't answering to everyone at ESPN.
Stephen, you missed the meeting. Okay. You could argue, Stephen, you're paid the most. You should be at the meeting. That's part of your job description.
I watched some of Draymond and JJ did that crossover thing, and JJ was laughing. Like they have like producer meetings, and like him and he's always saying that like Stephen would like scream at him in those. Like Stephen is a part of those like 7
You and I met him, and what was our takeaway after we talked to him in the hallway for 15 minutes?
Guy, if you watch the Draymond, JJ Redick, Stephen A. Smith, he acted exactly like he was like he does on his television show, like he did in the hallway. That's him.
That's him. That was we met him and we went, holy shit.
I think the new media, and Draymond's friends with Stephen A. I think Skip is putting on much more of a show than Stephen A. has ever put on.
Did you see even though last night?
Who?
Skip?
No, who?
He had dinner at Lil Wayne's house. He had a picture of Lil Wayne at the house. Like, came to Lil Wayne's house for dinner. Me and the wife, like, me and Jessica just had a great time at Lil Wayne's.
I think Lil Wayne likes him.
Well, he was like, yeah, he's like, I wore my Cowboys shirt only because I know he hates all the Cowboys except for Micah.
Yes.
Everybody's playing the same game, and the only game you could play within this game is to act like you're not playing the same game, which is Draymond's move right now. Like, I'm playing a different game than the rest of these assholes. But eventually, he'll be playing the same game as everybody else.
Well, he already had to recant because he said Steph Curry couldn't get his own shot in 2016.
Well, I told you this the other day. I was like, I'm going to laugh in like mid-July when Draymond does like his top 10 players of all time podcast. It's the same game everybody else does because you're like, well, shit. I don't have to do a show, but if I'm getting 300,000 views in 12 hours, might as well do a top 10 list. Right. So
yeah,
it's everybody's playing the same game, and just like USC, and they're all playing the same game. And you're just trying to get to the top. You're just trying to be at the top when you are the most immune from all of the other things that happen. And that's why being a pro sport team owner is one of the most exclusive clubs you can be in. Because once you're in, and this is why they don't want to kick Dan Snyder out. It's why Cuban didn't want him to kick what's his name? The owner of the Clippers,
Donald
Sterling out, because the most valuable part of being the owner is the team, A, but B, they don't fire anybody. nobody loses their team. That's at the top of the food chain. They can't take it from you. They did, but that's basically the deal. And so that's what everyone else is just trying to. Everyone's just trying to get to the point where whatever you have, they cannot take it from you. And the fact is, one day we all die, and whatever you have, you don't take with you.
No, the government takes half. You give the rest of your kids, and they squander it. So
just look around. I've heard people say this, like money managers, like look around your house. Like, what things do you own that other people would give you what you paid for them?
Yeah. Most of life is pretty irrelevant beside the time you spend with other people. Let's be honestly.
Yeah. I mean, we're all just.
But I'm just saying, like, you're sitting in a house you own. I'm sitting in a condo I own. If it burned down tomorrow, it would suck and it would be devastating. Would it fucking end our lives? I mean, honestly, honest question.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's just like, now if fucking my mom burned down or your mom burned down or Alyssa or I lost a leg or something, it's like, that's real problems. Like, ultimately, like, the best part about capitalism, money comes, money goes, and you can always find ways to make more money.
Yeah, but getting left out in college football realignment is like becoming homeless.
Yeah.
So that's a real problem. I'm not saying, you just want to shut it down and go live on, what was the island somebody told us they were hanging out on the other day? Not Riker Island.
I don't even know.
We had you saw our submission, our shave it or save it submission.
I got to read the email. I looked at the pictures.
It's basically some guys on vacation. Ryan
Middlekauff's like I zoned out, guy. I have zoned out of. I've deleted Twitter from my phone. I try to just. I'm using these 40 days. Like I need to. This is. I can't. I mean, because I'm numb to it all. Because once I get in the mode of like money making time, season time, whatever, I'm in it. But like I've learned to separate church and state.
Oh, believe me, I've been very disconnected. But I got an email from a guy that the headline was,
no, I know,
shave it or save it, and that fired me up.
I did too.
He was at Necker Island, which is Richard Branson's island in the Virgin Islands. Got COVID, so him and his girlfriend got stuck there. And in the time they were stuck there, they decided to take pictures of his head and asked if he should shave his hair. So, Ryan, we haven't gotten to you yet, but we will get to a shave it or save it.
We'll do a YouTube on you.
Yeah, we'll do a YouTube on you. Anyway. All right. So this ended we now conclude our brief siesta recall.
See you August 1st.
See ya. Yeah. See you later, everybody. Thanks for hanging with us.